Well, we start here. The ANC will resume its 55th National Conference today. This is after failing to complete its business at Nasrec last month. The virtual conference will be held over 2 days ahead of the party's January 8 celebrations on Sunday. Party President Cyril Ramaphosa says he's proud of the outcome of the party's 55th National Conference held in Nasrec. But for analysis on some of the developments, we are joined by political analyst Doctor Ongama Mtimka. Ongama, good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I think your view on the ANC having taken this approach to finish off its business in a virtual conference, what it says about how organized the organization is and really what you're hoping to hear from the conference.
Good morning to you, Naledi and Desri, as well as your listeners. Thank you for having me this morning. So there were quite a lot of challenges that the ANC faced with the office of the Secretary General, almost non-existent leading up to the conference. But that was not, what wasn't known. The party should have been better prepared. And I think that, for example, Gauteng was able to do some registration of delegates or whatever administrative process needed to be done ahead of the conference. So things could have been done a lot better following their example. So the challenge with the party's conference was as much an issue of poor administration and management and leadership as it was of the circumstances the party found itself in of having a Secretary General's office that was non-existent. We had seen this happen in provincial conferences where after all the politicking about credentials and accepting registrations of delegates, conference started way later than it should have started and resulted in the business of conference not being completed and needing to be reconvened. So the ANC should have learned even from those processes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said about what we saw at the 55th National Conference in Nasrec, about even the credentials process and really how long it took for that to be, I suppose, solidified in Nasrec. And I wonder then what that means as they continue the conference virtually, where credentials then play a role, especially when you consider the very important items that are in the agenda, right? What does that say about just how much input is going to be going into things as important as constitutional amendments of the party's constitution?
Sure, that's interesting. I didn't see what the direction is, by the way, in terms of whether they take this as continuation of the previous conference, and therefore it's not going to reopen things like credentials, report, and all of those things. But it's interesting that who is here at this moment has got to have a way in which it is captured so that the legitimacy of the resolutions made here, may not be up to question in future. But I think that the most important things have been done, such as the elections of the officials as well as NEC at the last conference, and only the outcome was announced after the conference. Yeah. That then says there's little by way of internal politicking that may affect the legitimacy of this gathering.
I know that one of the very big conversations that certainly has taken place within the ANC over the last few weeks, even in the run-up to the national conference, was what the party decides from a policy point of view, particularly on the step-aside rule. I mean, are you expecting any sort of explosive declarations where that is concerned when they do make their announcements tomorrow morning?
Sure, I got wind of it. I think in the document that's the draft report, the reference to stepping aside has got over 20 mentions. I think there are about 25. And it's mostly in the affirmative, Naledi, in terms of continuing with the policy conference recommendations, that step-aside rule continue. I saw reference to a need to improve some of the ways in which it is applied, and also I saw an interesting review every 6 months of the condition of those who've stepped aside, which shows that the party is making and remaking these institutions, I think since the Mangaung conference, where attempts were made to try and grapple with this issue of what kind of leaders the ANC has. And when I saw some of the references to how step aside should be managed going forward, it seems to me that there's a greater improvement. But I think what will give comfort to most South Africans is the fact that the foot is not being taken off the accelerator with respect to stepping aside. But what's happening is that there's an improvement in terms of how it is practiced based on the responses that have been lodged by those that have been critical of it, but also based on purely on the basis of what can work going forward.
Yeah, I wanted to sit on the policy discussion for a little bit, because I think that one of the biggest criticisms that we heard during the physical conference in Nasrec was that there wasn't enough deliberation around policy. What are the priorities that the ANC needs to set itself as it completes the conference virtually? And any sort of fresh ideas from a policy point of view that you're hoping to hear from them?
Sure. I think on the front of state building, the right messages are being stated. What was a huge disappointment for me is to see that, notwithstanding the findings of the Zondo Commission, the party still commits itself to cadre deployment, except that what it says is that cadre deployment must focus on competent people. The challenge, Naledi, with cadre deployment is the manner in which the party does it, more than I guess also in addition to who gets to be deployed. The ANC, speaking to Chief Justice Zondo, explained that what they do is to effectively undermine the process that is led by the state, which is an open, competitive process to determine which candidates are suitable for what positions, because they then come right at the tail end of the process to impose a candidate. That is blatantly wrong, and I was surprised that they could speak about it in public as though it was right. The right way in for them to do this cadre deployment, if they must, would be to recommend for their candidates to apply in the processes of determining who is going to be the best candidate for a job. And then if those candidates are not making it through the processes, then that's it. Not come at the tail end of the process to impose a candidate in a way that undermines the open recruitment processes that are followed. And that, in my view, means that the continuity of state capture has been affirmed by this conference by not necessarily, making sure that the party's cadre deployment process is in line with what is desirable at the level of the state, rather than them subjecting open recruitment processes to party political processes. On the economic front, Naledi, yes, I think that we need a lot more. We need a lot more in bold thinking in terms of making sure that South Africa is an inclusive economy and monopolies are broken. It doesn't make economic sense to have big fives across all these sectors of the economy, because price fixing and abusive practices get to be undertaken, and collusion, which then makes South African economic sectors fertile ground for the rise of mafia type groups that challenge that seek to stake a claim in those sectors.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of unity within the party, right? I mean, in the run-up to the 55th National Conference, you had Fikile Mbalula, now SG of the party. But in the run-up to the conference, he spoke to media and made a very, I suppose, emphatic point around how for the party, this particular conference is about unity or death of the party. And I think it was a very strong statement that Fikile Mbalula made there. But what does that look like right now in terms of some of the synergies within the party? I want to talk a little bit even about the relationship between Ramaphosa and Stanley Mathabatha. Will it ever be the same after Mathabatha and other provinces changed their tune in the conference at Nasrec?
I think that the party needs to distinguish between two things. There were contestants to the position of president, among others, deputy president, and so on at the conference, and the national chairperson, which were purely about getting different provinces or different elites getting a seat in the top 7. But also there were contestations that were about which faction of the party is dominant. And those, to me, talk to the existence of two parties within one organization. And I think that those that, for example, have failed to accept the conference outcome are at liberty to do what is reported as they'll be doing, of forming an alternative political party which they feel carries the aspirations of RET. But I don't think that the current leadership should treat everybody who contested the president as people who are intent on making life difficult for him. So, for example, Paul Mashatile, who may not have been the favorite of the president, can't be treated the same way as people who are hell-bent on, getting the ANC at all costs under their own control. So there should, going forward, be making amends with people that still believe in the sustainability of the party, while no attempt gets made at all to retain those that are vehemently opposed to the agenda of renewal, because those people do not belong to a party that seeks to appeal to a wider base in South Africa of making sure that this country has got the right institutions that work to protect our democracy.
It's an interesting point of view. Phala, is that the white elephant? Do you think it will form part of the discussions when the conference resumes?
It seems to me that the politicking around Phala was dealt with at the conference. What's left now is going to be what is triggered by, state processes of either findings of the public protector or any report that gets generated by any of the agencies that are investigating the president. But I think that Phala was politically managed for now, both at the level of the state and at the level of the party, to the extent that I doubt that without a particular trigger of new developments, it's going to resurface again. But when it does resurface, it will throw some of the emerging unity into a tailspin, in the sense that we do know that there are some within the top 7 that are ambitious and seek to lead the party at the highest level. So I don't think that they will waste any opportunity that a scandal may put President Cyril Ramaphosa in.
Dr. Ongama Mtimka there speaking to us. Thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it. He is, of course, a political analyst.